Hello, class 4. Long time since we've done this. I hope you're sitting comfortably because we're going to go and do our reading lesson. We're not going to go anywhere. We're just going to do it from here, from my kitchen basement. We are going to read the next chapter of Podkin Monia. We are up to chapter 6. No, we're not. That's a lie. We're up to chapter 5. And because you're probably watching this video with parents, carers, aunties, uncles, dogs, cats, goldfish, we need to just have a quick recap of what's happened so far so everybody knows where we're up to. But basically, we started with the bard, the traveling storyteller, who wandered across the snow and ended up at the Warren. And it was their equivalent of Christmas time, wasn't it? Midwinter's Eve. And he was handing out gifts and stuff, and the little rabbits wanted a story. And they chose to hear the story of the legend of Podkin Monia. So then the story changed time and place, and it went to what happened with Podkin and how Podkin ended up with One Ear and how he went on a bit of an adventure. So it started off with Podkin's family, Warren. They were attacked by the Gorm, these metal armored, evil-looking rabbits, and he was asked to flee. So he fled with his sister and his brother Paz and Puck, and they were lost in the forest. It was all a bit scary. And then this whole Gorm crow, they hid, they laid a trap, and they successfully managed to kill one of the Gorm. And then it went back to the storyteller, who changed time and place, and he explained how the Gorm came to be. And then we're back now with Paz, Puck, and Podkin after they've killed the Gorm and trying to find out what happens next. So what's going to happen is I'm going to read it. It's quite a long chapter. It's not like Wild Robot, where the chapters are really short. It's really quite long. So I'm going to read it. And then there's some questions on Teacher Made. So I'm going to go to those questions now. And just if I share my screen, you should be able to see. If I share my screen here. Let's have a look. If I share my screen, you will see this worksheet. Now on this worksheet, it's questions. You've got vocabulary questions. So they're to do with words. So you're going to have to read the text and read the sentences and try and find out why words are chosen, or find and copy words that mean things, or define words. Inference is when you have to look for clues in the text. So you have to read it back to yourself, or listen to me reading it again, and see if you can guess why, or make sense of why things happened for inference. Then your prediction, what you think is going to happen next. There's one prediction question. Explain, this is where you've got to write a sentence or two giving reasons to justify why you think something has happened. Retrieval is just finding the facts in the text and just retrieving them, because retrieval means getting, so just getting the facts from the text. So you've got quite a lot of questions, and there's quite a lot of the story happens in this chapter. So I'm going to read it to you now, and then what I would like you to do is just listen to me read it today, and then have a go and answer some of the questions if you can, or at least have a look at the questions on the email. If you feel like having a go at some of them, great. If you'd rather wait till tomorrow, that's fine. But then tomorrow, I would like you to listen to me read it again, have a go at reading it yourself, and then see how many of the questions you can answer. And on Thursday, I will read chapter 6 and send some more questions. Right, here we go. Chapter 5, Redwater. After they had stood for a few moments, taken in what had happened, slowly realizing that they were still alive, the rabbits headed off into the wood again. The sun was well risen now, and they followed it eastward, crunching through the snow as drips from icicles pattered on their heads and ran down their necks, making them shiver even more. Before long, they stumbled down another bank and onto a narrow, frozen river. Paz, who actually had been paying attention in geography lessons, recognized it as the Red River. "This is the river that runs past Redwater Warren," Don't you remember it? Podkin was too cold to remember, even if he had been listening, about river names and types of trees. The terror of nearly being caught and the amazement at the power of Starclaw was gone. All he really wanted to do now was lay down in the white snow and fall asleep. Forever. But there was a dim little thing, a thought tugging away at the corner of his mind. Didn't they used to come here at midsummer every other year? And there had been other little rabbits, hadn't there? Oh, and they ate dandelion salad with carrot juice dressing. He was sure he remembered that. Was it different then? It wasn't white everywhere. Paz gave him a worried look and grabbed him by the arm. They half ran, half fell all the way along the riverbank until they came to an arched wooden bridge, and they followed a snowy track cut into the forest floor. It led them to a pair of oak doors set into the hillside. Notched writing carved into the gatepost declared it was Redwater. "Thank the goodness," said Paz, with tears in her eyes as she used the last of her strength to bang on the door. Podkin could do nothing but stand and shiver by her side, and little Pook was too cold for even that. After a few moments, the warren door creaked open, and a ginger-furred guard rabbit, poked out his head. Now, Paz and Podkin might have been half frozen, but they had been here several times before, and they remembered the famous hospitality of the Redwater rabbits. Everyone for miles knew how excitable and fun-loving the rabbits here were, and any rabbit who stopped here were practically dragged inside, and they were forced to eat and sing and dance until they dropped. Which is why they were shocked by this gloomy-faced guard, who peered at them now. His ears drooped. His eyes were shadowed and bloodshot. His leather armor was unpolished, battered, and torn. It barely fitted him, hanging off like old clothes on a scarecrow. If they hadn't been so frozen, they might have wondered why such a skinny, undersized rabbit was doing the job of a hardened warrior. "What do you want?" he asked, not looking like he cared in the slightest. Paz could sense that something was wrong, but she was too desperate listening to her gut. She cleared her throat and spoke. "We need help, please." "The Gorm are after us," Pod added. "Thoop," whispered Pook, poking a shivering nose out of Paz's tunic. "We're from Mulberry Warren. We're Chief Lopkin's children." The guard's eyes widened at this, and he slammed the door on them. For an awful moment, Podkin and Paz thought they were being shut out, but then they heard the guard shouting for help through the doors. "Are they going to let us in?" Podkin asked through chattering teeth. "I think so, but something's up. We better hide the dagger." Podkin looked dumbly, as if he was wondering how the dagger had even appeared in his hand. Quickly, Paz snatched it off him, wrapped it round with the cloth, and shoved it inside her tunic, next to Pook, who gave a little squeak of protest. She had hidden it away when the door creaked open again, this time revealing a familiar face. Lady Russet, the Redwater chieftain's wife. Even though Podkin's brain was practically an ice cube, he could see the terrible difference in the lady. The last time he was here, she had been a plump, bristling bundle of life, with zinging fur, a bubbling giggle, and eyes that sparked like glimmers of summer sunlight. Now, her skin hung from her face in folds. Lines of worry creased her brow. Her eyes were hollow, haunted and red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying for a long, long time. When she spoke, her voice was light and happy, but it sounded forced, as if she was trying to hide some great sadness. Why, if it isn't little Paz and Podkin, how you've grown since the summer. And is that tiny Pook nestled in there? You poor things, you look frozen half to death. Is it true what my guard tells me about the Gorm in your warren? Come in at once. You'll be safe here, I promise. Podkin knew this didn't feel right, that he should probably turn and run back into the icy woods. But he could hear the crackle of a fire somewhere down inside the warren, and he could smell roasting parsnips and freshly baked bread. At that moment, getting warm and having some food were more important to him than anything else, even his safety. Now that might sound silly to you, little rabbits, sitting by a toasty fire with a belly full of turnip soup, but try spending the night running for your life through a midwinter forest. After that, you'd chew the legs off a badger for a snack and somewhere cosy to sleep. In fact, food and warmth were more important than anything else right then for the rabbits. And although they didn't realize it, they were actually very, very close to freezing to death. If Podkin had laid down in that snow like he wanted to, it would have been his last sleep ever. He would have woken up in the land beyond, and there's no coming back from that place. So that was how they came to enter Redwater Warren, even though it was a mistake that Podkin would regret for the rest of his life. Oh, now normally in class I would stop and would leave that on a bit of cliffhanger, but because we've got a lot to get through, I'm gonna have to keep reading here. Oh no, so he's going in for his food and drink, but it's a mistake he's going to remember for the rest of his life. Let's find out. They were led through to the long burrow, and they sat down on benches by the fire. Lady Redwater went off to see that rooms were made ready for them, and that silent, shuffling serving rabbits brought out hot buttered parsnips and a few small loaves of bread. As soon as the blood started moving around his body again, Podkin's hands began to shake so badly he could hardly hold his plate. He managed a bite of parsnip eventually, and it burnt and tingled as it made its way down his throat. It was the best feeling he'd ever had. After a little while, the shaking stopped, and he found himself gulping down mouthfuls and tearing through the bread like a starved rabbit. Paz was doing the same, and little Pook even began to move around a bit. His nose wrinkled and his big eyes peered out from Paz's tunic. Neeps, neeps, he called, opening his mouth like a baby bird as Paz spooned hot parsnips inside. As his body began to thaw out, so did Podkin's wit. He noticed the long burrow was dark and damp. Thick cobwebs filled the corner, and the fire before them was a tiny one. The fireplace hadn't been swept for months. He looked around at the tables and benches, remembering the feasts of midsummer, when the hall was packed to the rafters with cheery rabbits. But now there was hardly any furniture left. The chairs were patched up and the back of the bench was splintered. The food actually wasn't quite right either. The parsnips were stringy. The bread was gritty and it was burnt on the outside. The last feast they'd had here, they ate a glorious meal, a giant carrot hollowed out, and inside there was a cascade of roasted turnips and swedes tumbled all over the table. Now that was proper Redwater food, not this meal in front of them. Once he'd started noticing one or two little things, his eyes picked out even more things wrong. Were there scratch marks on the walls? Were those dried red stains on the floor blood? And also, where were all the children? The chieftain's children, they played hide and seek, every year since he could remember. They were noisy and loud and as bubbly as any other rabbit in the warren. If they weren't here, then he should at least be able to hear them shouting or playing or chasing each other somewhere in the warren. This was Bramblemas morning after all. There should have been loads of little rabbits in the long burrow, all showing what the midwinter rabbit had brought them for gifts during the night. That was what had always happened in Munbury Warren. Podkin thought, I was hoping for a set of wooden soldiers for Bramblemas. He wondered if they'd been delivered anyway and was sitting next to his empty bed, or whether the midwinter rabbit knew about the gorm and kept away from his warren. It didn't seem important anymore, even though before the gorm came, it had been all he had thought about for weeks. How quickly your life can turn upside down, he thought. Paz, where do you think Rufus and Rusty are? Wouldn't they have come out to see us if they knew we were here? Paz nodded. Her eyes had been zipping everywhere, noticing the same things that Podkin had. Mostly, she was staring at a metal sculpture that hadn't been here before. A tall iron pedestal that jutted out from the floor. It wasn't really a model of anything, just a big lump of twists and coils, all jagged and uneven and unfinished. Why did they have an iron statue in their warren? Everyone knew that kind of metal was hated by the goddess. It reminded her of something, but her poor frozen brain couldn't quite place it. Then it came to her. The gorm. She wanted to tell Podkin, but didn't speak because 2 serving rabbits had just entered the room. They were carrying some kind of large box between them, covered with a thick blanket. They kept to the shadows as they edged their way around the long burrow. They had their heads down, but Paz could see them looking nervous. Out through the hallway they went to the main doors. When they were gone, she hissed at Pod, what was that they were carrying? Pod was about to shrug when he heard some kind of muffled cawing sound coming from the hallway, like an animal or a bird. That sound. They'd heard it before, just a few hours earlier. Podkin and Paz looked at each other, both thinking the same thought at the same time. It wasn't a box they were carrying. It was a cage. And inside must be one of the gorm's spy birds, a warped, tortured crow with dead eyes and rusty metal feathers. The bird, the statue, the dead, empty warren. Suddenly it all made sense. Terrible sense. They're working for the gorm. They're letting them know we're here. The gorm must have taken Redwater, just like Munbury. Chief Russet must have been killed and his guards murdered, and the rest of the warren turned to slaves. And as for the children, Podkin didn't like to think. They had chosen the worst possible place to run to. We have to get out, Paz started to say, but Podkin was already up and running. She grabbed Pook and went to follow him, when, from the corner of her eye, she caught the sight of the iron statue. Something inside it had squirmed, juddered, like a fat eel stuck in a pond. Could that even be possible? Then it made a noise, a grinding, screeching noise that grew louder and louder. She didn't stop to hear any more. Clutching Pook, she dashed after her brother as fast as quick rabbit legs would carry her. They sprinted out of the long burrow in the opposite direction of the main entrance. Just as a shout went up from the gallery above, someone had been watching them, and the voice sounded a lot like Lady Russet. Stop them! Don't let them escape! Into the tunnels of the warren they ran, the screams echoing behind them. Heading away from the main doors might have seemed a daft thing to do, but Podkin knew there would be guards at the front. He also knew that warrens had many back entrances, little ones, and bolt holes. He could hear his father's voice. A warren with only one entrance is basically a trap. A trap, just like the one they'd walked into. They dashed through dark, winding corridors, changing direction every time they heard footsteps nearby. The redwater rabbits were closing in on them, hounding them through tunnels like ferrets used to chase their fluffy ancestors. Shouting voices behind them echoed, and little Pook began to cry as he bounced around. Neeps, neeps. He could sense his sister's fear, but he was also very upset that his meal had been disturbed. There, Paz shouted, up ahead. The tunnel had become lighter, and as they rounded a corner, they saw a small open gate and the snowy forest beyond. They sprinted for it, as fast as terrified rabbits can. As Lady Russet's voice called out, seal the warren, close the gates. Slams and bangs began to echo through the passageways, and with horror, Podkins saw a metal portcullis began to grind down in front of the doorway ahead. Their escape was being blocked. They were going to be trapped inside. Sometimes, when your life is in real danger, when everything seems lost, there's an energy somewhere within you that gives you that last, final, desperate surge of power. It isn't always much, but it's often just enough to escape trouble just by a whisker. Podkin and Paz reached for their last bit of energy and doubled their speed down the tunnel as the heavy grill clanked further down. Paz reached it first, dropped to her knees, and slid underneath the portcullis's prongs and out into the snow. Whew. Podkin was just a split second behind her. He copied his sister, kicking his legs out and falling backwards to skid underneath. Looking up, he saw the roof of the tunnel pass by, the falling portcullis coming down. And then he saw the grey sky of the open air above. I did it, he thought. We're free. But then there came a sharp, searing pain in his ear. He tried to get up, but something was holding his head down. He was pinned down, something very painful. He heard Paz scream, and he twisted around to see what had happened. The portcullis was down. And they were both outside, or at least most of them was outside. One of Podkin's long, silky brown ears was still inside, and it had been speared through, holding him in place, one of the prongs of the portcullis. He had been pinned to the ground. He was trapped. Ooh, end of chapter 5. No, that was a long one. Really exciting chapter. I think we're starting to get to the point now where we find out why he's named Podkin One Ear. Okay, so have a look at the questions now. And then in a couple of days' time, I'll give you the next chapter. And then tomorrow, listen to me reading it again or have a go at reading yourself and try the rest of the questions.